If this story touches your heart, take a moment to reflect on the power of resilience, love. Together, we can celebrate the bonds that make life extraordinary. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more incredible stories. On a bitter winter night, the wind roared through the empty streets of a quiet mountain town, sending flurries of snow cascading across the frozen landscape. In a modest cabin nestled at the edge of the forest, Harper Reeves was settling in for another solitary evening. Since retiring from her job as a nurse, the peace of her isolated home had become her sanctuary. But tonight, that peace was shattered by an unexpected sound of faint scratching at the door. Harper frowned, pulling her knit shawl tighter around her shoulders as she moved toward the noise. The scratching grew more urgent. Hesitating for a moment, she opened the door and the icy wind surged into the room. Standing before her was a trembling German shepherd, her coat matted with frost and her body quaking with exhaustion. At her side, barely visible in the dim light, was a tiny puppy lying motionless in the snow. Harper's breath caught. The mother dog's amber eyes locked onto hers, a silent plea emanating from their depths. Without hesitation, Harper bent down, scooping the puppy into her arms. Its body was alarmingly cold, the faintest rise and fall of its chest the only indication it was still alive. "Come on," Harper said softly, looking back at the mother dog. "Let's get you inside." The shepherd hesitated, her paws sinking into the snow, but followed Harper into the warm glow of the cabin. Once inside, Harper set to work. She laid the puppy on a soft blanket by the fire, gently rubbing its tiny body with a warm towel. "Stay with me, little one," she murmured, her hands moving with the practiced precision of someone who had saved lives before. The puppy let out a faint whimper, a fragile sound that filled Harper with cautious hope. The mother dog, clearly weakened, sank onto the floor beside her pup. Harper noticed her raw, bleeding paws and the exhaustion etched into every line of her body. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Harper said gently, draping another blanket over the shepherd. The dog's eyes never left her pup, her nose brushing its tiny head in a gesture of reassurance. Harper watched the interaction, a lump forming in her throat. As the storm raged on outside, the small cabin became a haven of warmth and quiet determination. Harper brewed a cup of tea, her gaze fixed on the pair huddled near the fire. Questions swirled in her mind. Where had they come from? How had they ended up in this condition? But she knew the answers didn't matter as much as what came next. The mother dog had braved a deadly storm, driven by nothing but the primal instinct to protect her pup. Harper felt a deep connection to that determination, a reminder of her own struggles and sacrifices. That night, as she sat beside the fire, Harper made a silent promise. She would do everything in her power to help them heal. By morning, the storm had subsided, leaving the world outside blanketed in untouched snow. Inside the cabin, the German shepherd and her puppy slept soundly, their breathing steady for the first time. Harper, sitting in a rocking chair with a blanket draped over her knees, gazed at them with a newfound sense of purpose. Their arrival had brought with it a spark she hadn't realized she'd been missing, a reason to care, to fight, and to love again. This was only the beginning of their journey, but Harper knew one thing for certain: they had found each other for a reason. Together, they would weather whatever storms lay ahead. As Harper Kane sat by the fire, exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders, but she refused to let herself rest. Her gaze lingered on the German shepherd and her tiny pup, now nestled in the makeshift bed Harper had carefully prepared. The storm outside continued its relentless howl, but inside the cabin, the crackling fire cast a warm glow that softened the harshness of the night. The puppy stirred, letting out a faint whimper. Harper immediately leaned forward, the dropper still in her hand. She'd been hydrating the fragile creature every few minutes, coaxing it to take just a few more drops of water. "You're stronger than you look," she whispered, her voice a steadying presence in the stillness. "Just hang on a little longer." The mother dog lifted her head slightly, her amber eyes locking onto Harper's. There was something almost human in her expression, a mix of gratitude and weary determination. Harper couldn't shake the feeling that this dog understood the gravity of their situation, that she had entrusted her pup's survival to a stranger out of sheer desperation. It was a responsibility Harper didn't take lightly. After ensuring the puppy had swallowed enough water, Harper turned her attention to the mother. Her matted fur and raw paw pads told a story of hardship and endurance. Harper reached for a small bowl of warm broth she had prepared, gently sliding it toward the dog. "You need to eat, girl," she coaxed. "You've got to keep your strength up for him." The mother hesitated but finally leaned forward, lapping at the broth with measured movements. Harper exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Every small victory felt monumental tonight. As the hours passed, the storm outside began to show signs of easing, though the occasional gust rattled the windows. Harper's mind wandered to what might come next. She knew the nearest vet was still too far to reach until morning, but she needed a plan. These two couldn't survive much longer without proper care. Harper glanced at the clock. The hands seemed to move painfully slow, each tick a reminder of how precarious the situation was. Yet, amidst the worry, there was a strange calm in the cabin. The mother dog, now full and visibly more relaxed, rested her head on her paws, her eyes closing for the first time in what Harper guessed had been days. The puppy, cradled against its mother's warmth, let out another soft whimper, but seemed to be breathing a little easier. Harper leaned back in her chair, her hand resting on the armrest as her own fatigue began to catch up with her. She knew sleep wasn't an option, not yet, but the rhythmic rise and fall of the puppy's tiny chest and the serene stillness of the mother gave her a sliver of hope. "We're going to get through this," she said softly. Her words meant as much for herself as for the little family she'd taken in. As dawn began to creep through the edges of the storm, Harper resolved to do whatever it took to give them a second chance. For now, they had each other, and that was enough. As Harper worked tirelessly to clear the snow from the pathway outside, the cold air bit at her cheeks, but she didn't mind. The rhythmic scrape of the shovel against the frozen ground gave her something to focus on, a way to channel her determination. She knew that every small action counted. If the mother dog and her pup were going to make it, they needed a warm, safe environment and access to care when the roads finally cleared. Inside, the German Shepherd was slowly regaining her strength. She remained curled protectively around her puppy, her amber eyes tracking every movement Harper made. There was a newfound alertness in her gaze, as though she understood that she and her baby were finally safe. Harper smiled when she noticed the dog's tail give a faint wag as she returned from outside. "Looks like you're starting to trust me," Harper said gently, brushing snow off her coat. She crouched down to meet the mother dog's eyes. "And I don't blame you for being cautious. You've been through a lot." The puppy stirred again, letting out a faint squeak. Harper's heart swelled at the sound. She carefully knelt beside the pair, holding out her hand for the mother to sniff before checking on the pup. It was small and fragile, but its breathing had become steadier, and its coat felt warmer under Harper's fingers. "You're a fighter," Harper murmured. She turned her attention to the mother, who nudged her baby closer. "Both of you are." Harper went to the kitchen, her mind racing with plans for the day. The snowstorm had made the roads treacherous, but she couldn't delay a vet visit for much longer. The mother and pup needed professional care to ensure their recovery. For now, Harper focused on keeping them comfortable. She warmed a bit of broth for the mother, adding nutrients to help her regain her strength, and placed it near her with a soft encouragement. As the hours passed, Harper worked to make her home even cozier for her guests. She rearranged furniture to clear space near the fireplace, adding extra blankets and cushions. The living room transformed into a haven, a stark contrast to the brutal cold just beyond the door. Every detail reflected her growing commitment to the pair that had turned her quiet life upside down. By mid-afternoon, the mother was visibly stronger. She stood on shaky legs to stretch, her gaze never straying far from her pup. Harper watched, a mix of relief and admiration washing over her. "You're incredible. You know that?" Harper said softly. "I don't know what you've been through, but you're not facing it alone anymore." The mother gave a small, approving chuff, as though acknowledging Harper's words. It was a moment of mutual understanding, a silent pact that they would get through this together. Harper felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of purpose that came from caring for these two fragile lives. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the snow-covered fields, Harper sat back in her chair. She watched as the mother lay protectively around her pup, their small family radiating resilience. For the first time in years, Harper didn't feel alone. She didn't just see two animals fighting for survival, she saw hope, strength, and the beginning of a bond that would change all their lives. Harper watched as Grace stood and stretched, her movements steadier and more confident with each passing day. The puppy, still fragile but undeniably stronger, wiggled clumsily against the blankets, its small paws making soft tapping sounds on the wooden floor. Harper couldn't help but smile. Their progress, though slow, felt like tiny victories worth celebrating. That evening, as the fire cast a warm glow across the room, Harper sat cross-legged on the floor near the pair. The weight of the past week pressed lightly on her shoulders, but it was a welcome burden. She had found a new rhythm, one built around feeding Grace, tending to the puppy, and ensuring the house stayed warm and safe against the bitter cold outside. It wasn't the life she had expected, but it was one she now cherished. Grace nudged her pup closer with her nose, licking its tiny head before resting her chin protectively over its back. Harper observed the quiet exchange, her heart swelling at the unconditional love and care the mother dog displayed. She ran her fingers across the spine of an old journal sitting on the floor beside her. Without fully realizing it, she had begun documenting the journey, a daily record of Grace's recovery, the puppy's milestones, and her own thoughts. It had started as a simple habit, but now it felt like a way to honor their shared experience. Harper flipped to an entry from a few nights ago, her handwriting scrawled but legible. Grace ate a full meal today and even wagged her tail. The puppy squeaked when I picked it up, but it didn't seem afraid. Small steps, but they mean the world. She placed the journal aside and looked at Grace. "You're remarkable. You know that?" Harper said softly. Grace's ears twitched, and her amber eyes locked on Harper's, filled with a depth of trust that hadn't been there before. It was as if Grace understood Harper's words, or at least the sentiment behind them. The crackling of the fire filled the silence as Harper leaned back, her gaze shifting between Grace, the pup, and the flickering flames. The once empty cabin had become a sanctuary, alive with warmth and resilience. Grace and her pup had brought something Harper didn't realize she had lost purpose. "You've changed everything," Harper whispered. "And I'm grateful." As the night deepened, Harper pulled a blanket around her shoulders, her resolve solidifying. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building a new life, together. And the crisp winter air filled Harper's lungs as she stepped outside with Grace by her side. The German Shepherd moved cautiously at first, her paws sinking into the snow, but her tail swayed gently, a sign of growing confidence. Harper held the leash loosely, giving Grace the freedom to explore while staying close. "You're doing great, Grace," Harper said, her breath forming clouds in the chilly air. The shepherd glanced back at her, as if to say, "I'm trying." For the first time, Harper realized how far they had come together in such a short span of time. The once frightened and battered dog was beginning to trust again, her spirit slowly mending alongside her body. The world outside was serene. The sun glinted off the untouched snow, and the distant chirping of birds hinted that the storm's grip was finally loosening. Harper stopped by a cluster of evergreens and let Grace sniff around, her ears perking up at the faint rustle of branches. It was a moment of peace, a brief reprieve from the chaos that had brought them together. Back at the cabin, Chance was nestled in his bed near the fire, the warmth coaxing him into a deep sleep. Harper had lined the area with extra blankets and even placed a small stuffed toy beside him, a gesture she hoped would comfort the tiny pup when he was alone. As Harper and Grace made their way back, she couldn't help but reflect on the unexpected turn her life had taken. The quiet solitude she had once clung to had been replaced by the soft hum of companionship. Grace and Chance had filled a void Harper hadn't realized was so vast, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose she thought she'd lost forever. When they returned to the cabin, Grace immediately checked on Chance, nosing him gently and settling beside him with a contented sigh. Harper watched the tender exchange, her heart swelling with gratitude. She set down a bowl of fresh water and food for Grace before stoking the fire to ensure the room stayed warm as the evening chill crept in. "You've both been through so much," Harper said, sitting cross-legged near the fire. "But you're fighters, and we'll keep fighting together." Grace looked up at Harper, her amber eyes reflecting the glow of the flames. It was a gaze full of trust and gratitude, a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. and her eyes sparkled with a newfound confidence. She had fully embraced her role as both a protector and a mother, often nudging Chance gently when he strayed too far or curling around him when he grew tired. Harper marveled at how far she had come since that fateful night when she appeared at his door, broken and desperate. Now, she was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of how love and care could heal even the deepest wounds. One morning, Harper decided it was time for a small adventure. The weather was mild, the sky a clear expanse of blue, and the snow had melted enough to reveal patches of green. He grabbed a leash for Grace and bundled Chance in a small blanket-lined carrier. "Ready to see the world, little one?" Harper asked, glancing at the puppy, who let out a tiny yip of excitement. The trio ventured outside, Grace walking proudly beside Harper while Chance peeked out of the carrier, his nose twitching at the fresh sense of the world beyond the cabin. Harper led them to a nearby meadow, the ground damp but soft beneath their feet. He set the carrier down, allowing Chance to explore while keeping a watchful eye. The puppy wobbled on unsteady legs, his tiny tail wagging furiously as he took in the open space. Grace followed closely, her protective instincts on full display. At one point, Chance stumbled and let out a small yelp. Grace was at his side in an instant, nuzzling him gently until he regained his footing. Harper couldn't help but smile at the scene, his heart swelling with pride and affection. "You're a natural, Grace," Harper said, kneeling beside her and stroking her head. "I don't know how you did it, but you've raised a fighter." The meadow outing was a success, a moment of pure joy for all three. It was as though the weight of their past struggles had momentarily lifted, replaced by the simple pleasure of being together. On the way back to the cabin, Harper felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn his life had taken. Grace and Chance had brought him more than companionship, they had given him a purpose. Back at the cabin, as the fire crackled and the sun dipped below the horizon, Harper sat quietly with Grace and Chance at his feet. For the first time in years, his heart felt full. The journey wasn't over, but together, they were stronger than ever, and wildflowers that seemed to blanket the ground in soft colors of renewal. The transformation of the landscape mirrored the changes happening inside the cabin. Grace and Chance, once fragile survivors, now thrived with energy and trust. Harper often found himself marveling at their progress, each moment a reminder of how far they had come together. One morning, Harper decided to take Grace and Chance on a longer walk, venturing further into the woods than they had before. The crisp air carried the scent of blooming flowers and damp earth, a stark contrast to the biting cold that had first brought them together. Grace led the way, her tail wagging in a steady rhythm as Chance tottered beside her, his curiosity boundless. "You've got the whole world ahead of you, little guy," Harper said, smiling as Chance barked at a fluttering butterfly. Grace watched her pup with a quiet pride, her protective instincts still sharp but softened by the safety she now felt. Harper carried a small pack with water and snacks, prepared for whatever the day might bring. He felt lighter, as though the weight of the solitude he had lived with for so long was finally lifting. As they walked, Harper's thoughts drifted to the stray they had encountered days before. He couldn't shake the image of its desperate eyes and matted fur. The encounter had left him with a lingering sense of responsibility. He knew what it was like to be lost, to struggle, and he couldn't ignore the parallels between the stray's plight and Grace's journey. Harper decided to bring food on their walks just in case the stray appeared again. Today, he carried a small pouch of kibble, tucked away in the hope that it might lead to another chance encounter. When they reached the meadow where Grace and Chance had first ventured out, Harper sat on a fallen log, letting the two explore. Chance stumbled over patches of wildflowers, his tiny tail wagging furiously, while Grace lounged nearby, her eyes never straying far from her pup. Harper noticed a flicker of movement at the edge of the clearing. The stray dog was back, watching from the shadows. This time, it seemed less hesitant, its body language cautious, but less defensive. Harper remained still, his hand reaching for the pouch of kibble. He tossed a few pieces onto the grass, the sound drawing the stray closer. "It's okay," Harper said softly, his voice carrying warmth and reassurance. Grace stood, her body tensing slightly, but Harper placed a calming hand on her back. "You're safe here," he added, not just to the stray but to Grace and Chance as well. The stray crept forward, its ribs still prominent, but its steps more deliberate. It sniffed the kibble, glancing warily at Harper before eating. Grace watched intently, her protective instincts clearly at odds with the stray's unthreatening behavior. After finishing the food, the stray lingered, its tail giving a hesitant wag. Harper smiled, feeling a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this stray would find its place here, just as Grace and Chance had. It reminded him of the resilience found in the most unlikely moments, the ability to trust again, even after the harshest trials. As they headed back to the cabin, the stray followed at a distance, its curiosity outweighing its fear. Grace didn't growl this time, her body language calm but watchful. Harper felt the beginnings of something new, a connection that would take time but was already building. Back at the cabin, Harper left the door slightly ajar, an unspoken invitation. The stray lingered outside, just beyond the threshold, its eyes locked on Harper and the warmth within. "Whenever you're ready," Harper murmured, leaving a small bowl of food on the porch. That evening, as Grace and Chance dozed by the fire, Harper glanced at the door. The stray hadn't come in yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. This cabin had become a place of second chances, not just for Grace and Chance, but for himself, and perhaps for one more soul in need of a home. And the milestones they had achieved together. The pages were filled with memories: Chance's first wobbly steps, Grace's protective growl when they encountered the stray, and the way their bond had deepened with each passing day. As the fire crackled softly, Harper flipped through the entries, his heart full of gratitude for how much his life had changed since that fateful stormy night. Grace lay with her head resting on Harper's lap, her eyes half closed, while Chance dozed curled against her side. The peace in the room was tangible, a stark contrast to the chaos and uncertainty that had brought them together. Harper reached down, stroking Grace's soft coat. "You've taught me a lot, you know," he murmured. "About strength, about trust, and about finding hope when it feels like there's none left." The cabin had become more than just a shelter for the three of them. It was a sanctuary, a place where healing and second chances had taken root. Harper thought back to the stray dog they had encountered in the woods. He had continued to leave food outside every evening, and though the dog hadn't yet stepped inside, its cautious presence near the cabin was a reminder of the fragility of survival and the power of patience. The next morning, Harper woke early, the pale light of dawn spilling through the windows. He decided to take Grace and Chance on a new path for their walk, one that led deeper into the woods where the trees gave way to rolling hills. Grace, as always, led the way, her movements confident and sure. Chance followed close behind, his energy boundless as he darted after every rustling leaf and scurrying squirrel. As they climbed one of the hills, the view opened up, revealing a breathtaking expanse of green meadows and distant mountains. Harper stopped, taking it all in, with Grace and Chance at his side. "This," he said aloud, "is what it's all about, finding moments like this." Grace nuzzled his hand, and Chance wagged his tiny tail as if agreeing. On the way back, Harper noticed movement in the distance. The stray dog was following at a distance, its gaunt frame blending with the shadows. This time, it seemed braver, edging closer as they neared the cabin. Harper didn't rush the moment, allowing the dog to set its own pace. "You'll come around when you're ready," he said softly, tossing a piece of bread onto the ground. Back at the cabin, Harper filled a second bowl with food and water, placing it just outside the door. Grace and Chance watched from the doorway, their curiosity evident. Harper leaned down, scratching Grace behind the ears. "This was your story once," he said. "Maybe it'll be his now." That night, Harper added another entry to his journal, writing about the stray's cautious approach and the sense of hope it stirred in him. As the fire crackled and the soft breathing of Grace and Chance filled the room, Harper realized that their journey was far from over. Together, they were building something lasting, something filled with trust, resilience, and the unbreakable bond that only comes from sharing life's hardest battles and brightest victories and a hearty stew for himself. The cabin was filled with the comforting aroma of the meal, and as the three of them settled together, Harper couldn't help but smile at how far they'd come. Grace and Chance eagerly devoured their portions, the sound of their contented munching filling the room. Harper sat back watching them, his heart full of gratitude and pride. "You deserve this," Harper said softly, his gaze shifting from Grace to Chance. "After everything you've been through, you've earned all of it." Grace lifted her head, her amber eyes glowing in the firelight, and nudged Harper's hand in a silent gesture of thanks. After dinner, Harper grabbed his journal and sat near the fire. He began to write, capturing the events of the day and reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The pages were no longer filled with uncertainty and fear, but with hope, growth, and the undeniable bond that had formed between them. Chance, now full and sleepy, wobbled over to Harper, his tiny tail wagging as he climbed into his lap. Harper chuckled, scratching behind the pup's ears. "You're getting bold, little guy," he said with a grin. Grace watched from her spot near the fire, her protective instincts still sharp, though her posture was relaxed. Harper felt a pang of emotion as he looked at her, a once starving, desperate dog, now radiating strength and calm. As the evening deepened, a soft knock on the door startled Harper. Grace was on her feet in an instant, her low growl a reminder that she was still vigilant. Harper approached the door cautiously, peering through the small window. To his surprise, it was the stray dog they'd encountered in the woods weeks ago. Opening the door slowly, Harper stepped out, holding a piece of chicken in his hand. The stray was thinner than he remembered, its cautious eyes darting from Harper to Grace, who stood beside him, her growl subsiding into curious silence. "You came back," Harper said softly, kneeling to the dog's level. He placed the food on the porch and stepped back, giving the dog space. The stray hesitated before inching forward to eat, its movements slow and wary. Grace watched intently but made no move, sensing that this was a moment of trust. Chance, from his spot near the fire, let out a soft bark, his curiosity evident. "There's room here for one more," Harper murmured as the stray finished eating and looked up at him. "If you want it?" The dog didn't run, didn't retreat into the woods as it had before. Instead, it sat on the edge of the porch, its body still tense but its eyes softer. Harper nodded, understanding that trust would take time. He left the door ajar and returned inside, where Grace and Chance awaited. Later that night, as Harper sat writing in his journal, he glanced at the porch to see the stray lying just outside the door, its head resting on its paws. Harper smiled to himself. The journey wasn't over, not for Grace, not for Chance, and now, not for this newcomer. Their story was one of survival and second chances, of the unexpected bonds that could change everything. Harper felt a deep sense of peace as he closed his journal for the night, knowing that home was no longer defined by four walls, but by the love and trust that filled the space within. The soft glow of the fire flickered in the cabin, illuminating a scene of quiet contentment. Harper Kane leaned back in his chair, the weight of the past weeks finally giving way to a sense of peace. Grace and Chance, now fully a part of his life, lay curled up together by the hearth. Their rhythmic breathing filled the room, a comforting reminder of how far they had come. Earlier that day, Harper had made a decision. He wanted to mark the beginning of their new life together in a meaningful way. He had prepared a surprise for Grace and Chance, two engraved tags that symbolized the bond they now shared. Digging into his pocket, Harper retrieved the small box and knelt beside Grace, her amber eyes watching him intently. "This is for you," Harper said softly, holding up the tag that read, "Grace, my guardian, my family." He fastened the tag onto her new collar, his hands steady despite the wave of emotion threatening to surface. Grace sat proudly, her tail wagging gently as if she understood the significance of the gesture. Next, Harper turned to Chance. The little pup wiggled with excitement, his playful energy filling the room. Harper secured the second tag around his tiny neck, the inscription reading, "Chance, my miracle." As soon as the collar was in place, Chance let out a delighted yip, bounding in a circle before returning to Harper's side. "There you go," Harper said, smiling as he ran a hand over Chance's soft fur. "You're officially home." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Harper stepped onto the porch with Grace and Chance. The evening air was cool but refreshing, carrying the faint scent of blooming wildflowers. Chance, worn out from the day's adventures, curled up at Harper's feet, his tiny form radiating warmth. Grace sat beside Harper, resting her head on his knee. Her once weary eyes now held a sense of peace and belonging. "You two have given me more than I ever thought possible," Harper said, his voice low but filled with gratitude. "You've turned this house into a home." Grace lifted her head, her eyes locking with his in a moment of silent understanding. It was a bond that didn't need words, one built on trust, love, and the shared journey that had brought them together. For Harper, it was the kind of connection he hadn't realized he was missing until it was right in front of him. As night fell, Harper carried a now sleeping Chance back inside, the pup's tiny snores making him chuckle. Grace followed closely, her steps light and purposeful, her protective nature ever present. Harper set Chance down gently in his bed near the fire, where Grace immediately lay beside him, her body forming a shield around her pup. Harper watched them for a moment, his heart full as he settled into his favorite chair. The fire crackled softly, its warm glow wrapping the room in a comforting embrace. It was a quiet, simple moment, but for Harper, it held all the richness of a life well lived. His once empty cabin was now brimming with love, resilience, and purpose. "This isn't the end," Harper whispered, his voice barely audible over the fire's gentle hum. "It's just the beginning." And with Grace and Chance by his side, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their story was a testament to the power of second chances, and the unbreakable bonds that could form when love and trust were given a chance to bloom. If this story of hope and resilience touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder of the beauty in second chances. Together, let's celebrate the moments that turn houses into homes and strangers into family. The story of Harper, Grace, and Chance is a poignant reminder of the transformative power of compassion, resilience, and connection in our own lives. Harper's willingness to open his heart and home to two strangers in desperate need reflects a timeless truth. Small acts of kindness can create profound change, not only for those we help but for ourselves. In a world that often feels isolating and overwhelming, this story teaches us that healing and purpose can be found in acts of service and love, no matter how simple. In our daily lives, we can draw lessons from Harper's journey. First, the importance of recognizing opportunities for kindness cannot be overstated. Whether it's extending a helping hand to a colleague, comforting a friend, or supporting someone in need, these moments of generosity often have ripple effects beyond what we can see. Second, Grace and Chance symbolize resilience in the face of adversity, showing us that even in our most challenging times, there is strength in persistence and hope for renewal. Additionally, Harper's transformation illustrates that connection and purpose are antidotes to loneliness and stagnation. In opening himself to Grace and Chance, he rediscovered joy, companionship, and a sense of fulfillment. This mirrors the reality that our lives become richer when we nurture relationships and invest in others, even when it requires effort or vulnerability. To apply these lessons in your own life, consider starting small. Look around and identify where you can make a difference, whether it's volunteering, adopting a pet in need, or simply reaching out to someone who might feel alone. Practice gratitude and acknowledge the small victories, as Harper did with Chance's first steps or Grace's regained confidence. These moments of appreciation help us see the beauty in progress, even when it feels slow or incremental. Finally, embrace the idea of second chances, whether it's giving them to yourself or others. Life is full of opportunities to rewrite our stories, heal from past struggles, and forge new paths. Like Harper, Grace, and Chance, we are all capable of building a life filled with love, trust, and resilience. By staying open to these possibilities, we not only enrich our own lives, but also create a ripple effect of positivity and hope in the lives of those around us. If this story touches your heart, take a moment to reflect on the power of resilience, love. Together, we can celebrate the bonds that make life extraordinary. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more incredible stories.